Hard Turn is presented by Overlake Medical Center and Clinics.
Life is full of big moments of change and transformation where we have to pivot on our path.
Those moments come with a wide variety of emotions, from fear and anxiety to joy and relief.
I'm Kelly Koopmans.
And I'm Mary Nam.
And this is Hard Turn.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, and welcome to Hard Turn. I'm Kelly Koopmans.
I'm Mary Nam.
Oh boy, another doozy of a one this week, but it kind of piggybacks off of last week. Last week we shared, it was kind of a special episode of giving a life update. My husband, Michael, passed away after a year-long battle with cancer. And I think when I initially sought out this topic, I was in kind of this anticipatory grief, which is something we'll talk about when we talk to Mandy Jenus in this episode. But if you haven't taken a listen to last episode, it might give you a little bit of a backstory for things that we reference in this upcoming episode, and I hope that helps some people out.
It was a deeply personal episode for you, Kelly. It was hard for you to share, and it was not something that was planned when you had this guest lined up. But the way that it worked out, it really adds to understanding what she's going to talk about today and bring some perspective in.
I hope at the end of the day that it's helpful to people because losing someone you love, of course, is a big foundational kind of shaking moment in life.
Seismic. Yeah.
And other than that, there are lots of different types of grief. So if you're thinking, hey, I haven't lost anyone yet in my life, maybe that's particularly close, but you can be grieving a version of yourself that existed before something transformational happened. Maybe you're grieving a career or who you were many years ago.
We talked about the identity, the loss of identity when you go through something like this. Yeah.
And there's lots of different types of grief also associated with death. People, when they grieve pets. So it's a huge topic. And as we said several times before, it's not something that people are comfortable talking about. And I think that I've kind of embraced this mission here in the first couple of months of this, of let's talk about it and normalize it because it's the big thing in my life right now. And I can only imagine that if it's the big thing in someone else's life right now, I want them to know that there's a space to explore it. So today we are talking with Mandy Jenus, and she's just awesome. Man, I really enjoyed speaking with her. She had this great insight and great way to think about life, think about loss, and kind of taking this big bad thing that happens in life and it lands on your plate. What are you going to do with it? And she decided to turn this into a career change of sorts and focus on becoming a grief advocate and a grief coach. And Mandy has a background in teaching, so it was kind of a natural transition for her. She's a communications instructor at Bellevue College, and she was back when her mom died. So for her, the transformational moment was losing her mom back in 2011. So she actually lived here in the Seattle area for a while. Part of her journey took her over to Chicago, and we'll kind of touch on why that change happened as well. But right now, she's a certified mental health coach and a grief advocate. Why don't we just touch a little bit on grief and just kind of some of your initial feelings on it before we kind of dive in here with Mandy?
Well, you hit the nail on the head when you said it's this big, bad thing, big, bad, sad thing that falls on your lap. And a lot of people don't know what to do with it. We feel it. It moves through us. It's the worst. I felt it when my dad died in 2020 of cancer. And it's one of those anticipatory things where you know it's coming, but nothing quite prepares you for the full oomph of it. But I would agree with you, Kelly, in that when we talk about grief, I associate it specifically with death. And it's not always the case. You can go through those feelings without experiencing death.
And we explored that in a couple previous episodes as well. People can listen to Connie's episode when you had your interview with her.
Yep. About moving through life and, the end of a career, your working life, your identity there. The Sandwich Generation episode where I speak with Julia, who is helping take care of her mother with Parkinson's and grieving the life and relationship she once had with her healthy mom and what it's like now, and missing that part, grieving that loss while trying to cope with the current life.
I find myself, I'm in the very beginning stages of this right now. I think that I can say I'm probably still numb, I would imagine. And I've heard that it gets worse before it gets better. So I feel like I'm anticipating this tsunami that's going to suddenly overtake me. Immediately when someone dies, there are so many things to do, and we're preparing for the celebration of life right now. So there are so many distractions. And what I think is great is that Mandy's going to kind of walk us through a couple of tools when you go beyond that person passing, and how do you move forward? How do you incorporate that into a new identity? And how do you do that without making something that is really hard and painful, without letting that kind of drag you down? But also being able to incorporate that in your day-to-day life. So anyway, let's give you a little background about Mandy. She was really close to her mom. She's an only child. She lost her mom in 2020. So she was going through grief just as the world was shutting down. Was that your similar experience?
Yes, very similar, yeah.
So as you would know then, after losing your dad, it's tough to do it in such an isolated feeling as well. And she kind of touched on the anticipatory grief that we talked about off the top of the show, when you're waiting for this thing to happen. That was like when Michael first got sick and we learned that it was distant at that point, stage 4. I kind of had this year of thinking, how will I cope with this? What does life look like? Preparing, feeling what it feels like to almost be a single parent to the 3 young kids, and kind of coping with that. But at the time that Mandy's mom got sick, she was living in Seattle, but Mandy's mom was in Chicago. And so like a lot of caretakers do, they kind of have to make a decision. How am I going to show up for my person? And in this moment, after Mandy learned that her mom was sick, it meant moving across the country.
I was her caregiver. I took a leave of absence. I left Seattle. I came back to Chicago. I took her to all of the appointments. I would have to carry her and clean her and do all of those things. And so I waded into caregiving, which also felt like I had a real out. Like many people said, your kid is only 4. You just earned tenure track at the college you teach at. You can't leave. You can't just leave your child and your job. And to me, that choice was obvious. I couldn't not be with my mother.
So this is where we start her hard turn.
That right there, what she just described, where she was, the crux of the decision she had to make, and it was, it always seems to happen like that, right? It's like your whole life changes, not just with your loved one's diagnosis and everything else, but it's like it's a seismic shift in your own life, the way you have to pivot. It's hard from the get-go, even before you get to the grief.
And in the face of other people's opinions of what you should or should not do.
Yes.
And you want to seek opinions from people that you know and trust, but there's that tension between what your heart is telling you and the advice that other people have, and trying to make the decision of which voice do I listen to? So in this case, she decided, I have a 4-year-old and I'm on track for tenure and I'm leaving. So that's exactly what she did. She picked up her stakes and moved across the country to do this. She cared for her mom, which, we kind of watched with my mother-in-law what that was like, and being able to watch my father-in-law care for my mother-in-law, who has had a 2.5-year battle with cancer on her own before she passed away, a year before my husband passed away, and seeing my father-in-law navigate that caretaking, and then finding myself in the same role of trying to be a caretaker and trying to show up best for that person. It's a tough thing to do, but for her, that was exactly where she wanted to be. So eventually she goes and she cares for her mom. Her mom passed. She spread her mom's ashes July 26th of 2020. And then the next day she found out she was pregnant.
What?
So we got a lot going on. We've got a
I did not. Okay.
Okay, you did not see that coming.
No.
Well, neither did
Wow.
she. So world pandemic, her mom has passed. She finds out that she's pregnant. She has moved. And with all of this going on, feeling like her life was in turmoil, she felt this calling to just immerse herself in grief and to really learn about it. So that's what she did. She dove deep. She learned all about it because she found there wasn't a lot of space for her to learn about how to cope with her own grief, and people that she would talk to, no one really knew what to do. So she decided to study it, really get right into the thick of it so that she could help herself and in turn, as a teacher, help others. She also said that she just really wanted to normalize it. And then one thing that I thought was really cool here, yes, cool, when we're talking about grief, is saying that if we can name it, we can tame it. So identifying the big thing, calling it what it is, and then figuring out how you're going to get your arms around it. And that is exactly what she did year one.
So there were a lot of changes just within the first year of losing her. So it took time. It took a lot of therapy. And it was 2.5-ish years in when I started exploring grief training programs and really understood that being certified as a coach give me the skills to be able to hear how people say what they say and pull out what's underneath their words, I think in a way that's very helpful to them. And again, my teaching skills allow me to be a facilitator. And that's when I decided I wanted to put the two together. And now the goal really is to help get into schools around the nation and help at least lay a foundation for grief-informed education. You know, we hear of all these tragedies and they'll say, we brought in a grief counselor if the children need it. It's very rare that children are going to pull themselves out of class and on their own go to see a grief counselor. I think what's more helpful is to have built into the curriculum this notion that as human beings during this quarter or this year in school, we will likely feel grief. We might all feel it together, helping us to understand, helping students and educators to understand that it's normal and it's human. And if we can normalize the conversation and get some of the basics down around what it feels like and how to talk about it, I see that as mission complete for me, really. And that's the dream.
So she wants everyone to be able to be part of this conversation. And the thing that I really hone in on and underline is normalizing talking about grief. Because just like we said at the top, grief can look like a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. It doesn't always mean you lose your person or have a big tragedy happen, but everyone deals with it in some form or another. And having the space to have that conversation, especially building it into the infrastructure of a school.
Okay, that was was great. Huge light bulb moment when she said that. Mm-hmm. And I thought, because I've said those words, you know, there will be grief counselors on hand for students that need it. Mm-hmm. But the reality is what she just said, it should be built in. And it just hit me, Kelly. I have got people I love that are, you know, that have gone through divorce in the last couple of years with kids. That is, they're grieving. Not just, you know, the kids, everyone in the family is grieving the life that they had. I don't know how a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 14-year-old would be able to know that, understand that, and come out and say, I don't like how I feel. I miss what I had. Help me with this, mm-hmm. you know? And how wonderful it would be if we would teach that to kids early on so that they know that's exactly what it's called. It's you're grieving and that's okay.
And let's face it, it's going to take an expert in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Because this is not something people just casually talk about around the water cooler of like, oh, how are you helping your kid grieve?
Right.
You know, people don't talk about it. And the thing is, we've touched on this several different times, but grief looks different for everyone. That's one of my big takeaways. After losing Michael, I joined this young widows group. And what has been so interesting is that we're all going through our loss at the same time. So we're all generally at the, you know, same points of grief. And we've all lost our husbands. And then just in our everyday conversations to hear how it manifests differently in day-to-day life and how everyone's thinking about things differently. And that's something that I think would be really helpful to people to hear, that it's everyone's different, and to have the expert there to help walk you through it. And Mandy had this whole background in teaching. And so she really felt like she was carrying on an important mission here of teaching about grief. When you think about grief, a lot of people say, oh, the 5 stages.
I'm not going to lie. I bought the book.
You bought the book?
After my dad died, I bought the book, The 5 Stages of Grief. Mm-hmm. You know, it was paperback, green cover. Mm-hmm. I started reading it and then I put it down.
What was it that led you to want to put it down?
Because it felt so clinical to me. And then I found myself internally checking, like, am I going through this now? Like putting my own experience against the formula, this famous formula. Mm-hmm. I wasn't really allowing myself to feel it. I was treating myself like not a science experiment. What's what I'm looking for here? I just wanted to, because I felt like if I was matching what she was, is it Kubler-Ross?
Kubler-Ross, yeah. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
If I was matching what she was explaining, then I must be doing it right. Mm. And am I doing it right? Am I here? Mm-hmm. Is this anger? Or am I still, in denial? I don't know.
And this is a great example, and I'm so glad that you brought this up, because those 5 stages, now for people who are like, I've generally heard about it, but what are we talking about here? So these 5 stages that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross initially proposed here were specifically for people who were dying, the person going through the event, not for the people who are left behind, which it's gotten so muddied over the years. Yeah. But also those 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And the things that has got a little bit muddied is that this is for grief in general, and that you follow those in a cycle.
Well, you tell me now, 4 years later, Kelly.
Where was I 4 years ago, dang it? And it might feel really comforting in the beginning to think, oh, okay, well, I'll just check one box and move on to the next.
It sure did at first.
But this is why grief sucks.
Yeah.
That's why grief sucks, man, because guess what? There is no handbook. There's no prescription. It's everyone's own journey.
Yes.
Now, I kind of hate that word, and I don't know why I hate that word, but you're not going to hit all of those. Maybe sometimes you'll feel some anger. Maybe some other times you'll feel some denial. But it's just kind of a jumble of emotions. So I guess moral of the story is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she had some great laying foundational things for people to talk about grief and to bring it kind of to the forefront. But unfortunately, there is no strict handbook for those of us left behind of how we can process.
And you're right. Through the years, it's gotten muddied. Exhibit A here, right here, me. Okay, moving on.
And that's exactly what Mandy wants to address. And she wants people to know that if you're the one who's left behind and you're grieving, it doesn't mean that you can't feel those feelings. That was never the idea in the first place. And if you do feel them, don't expect them to hit in order. Here's where she talks a little bit more about that.
So this idea of being able to check off a feeling, oh, I'm very angry today, check box. It doesn't work because grief is cyclical and we have triggers, and those triggers might last for forever. And so hearing a song or seeing a certain color car, who knows, can bring up that sense of anger. It doesn't mean that you're not doing grief right or you screwed up this part of the practice. So I like to explain to people that we can look at the stages and we can say, this is a great place to start. Tell me what you felt so far. And then we dig into those feelings.
How about this whole doing grief right?
Gosh, that stung, right? Because it's so true. And the other part where she says it's cyclical, I think most people, myself included, think it's a one-way street. That's always moving. So once you get past a certain point, you go to the next stop. And then you never look back. It doesn't go backwards. It's a one-way journey.
Yeah.
It's a circle.
My counselor from our group used a great comparison just last night. She kind of described it, if we were talking about a yo-yo, when you're talking about the ups and downs of grief and how everything feels, she described it as the string gets longer over time. So your descent into sadness can last longer, but when you come back up, that will take longer too. And so I thought that was a really helpful way of thinking about the different ups and downs of grief. And there's no doing it right. And that's something that I have encountered. I've talked to my sister a lot about that. I asked her just today, what is your takeaway? I'm curious of watching me go through grief over the last 2 months. What's your takeaway? And she says this tension between wanting to do it right so that you're going to be okay, in air quotes, and yet also talking to people and hearing their experience to validate that you are on track to do the right thing. So it's very difficult to think about trying to do it correctly when there is no correct way.
Are you self-conscious of it?
100%.
Because, and what I'm asking is, I don't know, like if someone said something funny and you laugh, are you self-conscious that, oh, Kelly's laughing today? She's been smiley for the last 4 hours.
I do feel that I am aware of other people's expectations of what I should be acting like. I think a good example, I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the last podcast, but coming to work and people were like, she's coming to work 2 weeks after her husband died. Like, why is she not staying out longer? And my assumption in my head is that, oh, people think I have moved on. People think I'm fine and that I'm just coming back to work, when in reality for me, I needed something that was predictable, and work was predictable. Being at home amid all of our stuff and emotions where a thought could flash through your head, that was unpredictable. That was difficult. Being at work was easy. So that's kind of being aware of what other people think of my grief.
Yeah.
And I got to let that go. And I'm working on it. I'm trying to work on it.
That mask, right?
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
At Overlake Medical Center and Clinics, we offer the full spectrum of care for every stage of life. And with our skilled and compassionate physicians and care teams, it's so much more than a place to get better. It's where you can achieve a lifetime of good health. Welcome to Overlake, where your care is our passion. For more information, visit overlakehospital.org.
You talked about the loss of your father. Did you find it to be helpful to talk to other people about it? Or did you find this is a journey that I need to kind of figure out and navigate myself?
It was hot and cold. And that's what I still kind of feel badly about, because some days I would want to talk about it. And it helped. I mean, we've got a lot of people here where we work, who've lost a parent as well. And it was nice to listen to their stories. And in doing so, I felt like I could share mine. And it was letting off steam that way, some of the sadness in the pressure cooker. And when you talk about it, it helps. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I didn't want to talk about it. Mm-hmm. And the other person, it's not like you have a sign on your head that says, come talk to me now. I'm good for the next 6 minutes. But after that, boy, oh boy.
She's a ticking time bomb, folks.
But isn't that how emotions work? Mm-hmm. So that part was hard.
Well, Mandy talks about in her classroom, she was in a communications class. So she felt like it's very much about communication. And everyone in her classroom knew that she had lost her mom. And so she decided she was going to incorporate grief into her class. And she wanted to create what she described as a grief-informed classroom that would allow students to identify their feelings and name them. And she ran into that a lot. Once she opened up in her classroom about her loss, she started hearing from her students. Here's one example.
I was teaching an online communication class on Zoom, and a great student, she chatted me and she said, can you please stay on after class? And I said, of course. And everybody cleared out of the Zoom room and she started sobbing. And I said, are you okay? Are you safe? Did something happen? And she said, my mom died on Friday and I haven't told anybody yet. And I don't know what to do. And I remembered you sharing your mom's story and I just felt like you would get it. And that meant the world to me, because I did go through the process as an instructor of putting in a care ticket for her to ensure that a counselor followed up with her. But as teachers, we are the people that they see. We are the people that get to build trust with them. And because I shared my vulnerability in class, I gave somebody else permission to do the same. And in that moment, even if for just that moment, she felt less alone and was able to share her story.
And in that, I think there is a gift in grief. I heard Stephen Colbert say relatively recently, what punishments of God are not gifts? And not 100% there yet. However, I do think there is a gift that comes with experiencing that kind of pain, because you can form the type of connection with someone else so instantly, because you know that other person knows what you're going through because they've been there, and you don't have to explain to someone else how you're feeling. So what a space for her to open up in her classroom. And I think one thing that I've run into a lot is, and bless the people who do this, I had one person here at work that really stands out to me. He came up to me about a month after Michael passed, and he's like, yeah, I never knew what to say. I don't know what to say, but I feel like I should just let you know I'm thinking of you. And I'm so sorry I haven't said anything, and I don't mean for it to be awkward. And my response in that moment was, and here you are. And here you are. Despite the risk of maybe it feeling awkward and not knowing what I would say, you put yourself out there and you came and said something rather than just keep on walking and then you don't know. And what was great was in that moment, we were able to kind of confront the awkwardness and talk about it and say, I don't expect you to know what to say. That's okay. Just like it was okay for him to say, oh gosh, I didn't want you to think I was ignoring you and just to address the awkwardness of it all, I felt like was kind of a healing moment in a lot of different ways. So I kind of like confronting the awkwardness of it.
Oh, that took guts for him.
It did. I thought it was big of him.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciated it because I know that people don't know what to say and they don't know what to do. And to put yourself totally out there of saying like, oh gosh, I feel like I'm doing this way too late and I don't even know if it's right. I just thought that was a really great moment. And I think that also comes down to one thing that she mentioned, that Mandy mentioned, is this vulnerability.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people say, you're so strong. And I think I have a hard time with the word strong. And I think that they're saying I'm strong for being able to open up about a vulnerability where in our society, we've made it kind of feel like you have to be tough if you're going to share something that is important or may expose a soft spot.
Sure.
And I just wish it didn't have to be that way. I wish we could talk about vulnerabilities without it having to be some big, brave act.
But I also think grief is one of those things that, it can break people, and it has. There are stories of people who lose someone, and you hear about how they are never the same again. It can change you, and hurt so deep that it affects the rest of your life. But to go back to what you said about, how it gives the other person permission, I was just thinking, what other experience in life can be so painful, just that unspeakable pain, but it can also bring two complete strangers together. Mm-hmm. That's really unusual. Usually you turn to the people you love that you have an established friendship, relationship with to share those things. But some things in life, it can be so painful and so raw that it can actually bring complete strangers together. It can give them permission to come together and talk about it and share their experiences and connect.
And I've had a couple of moments like that.
Yeah.
I've been at a birthday party where a random parent was like, oh, how you doing? That not knowing. And it's kind of in that moment you make the split-second decision. Am I going to be open and honest and open the door to maybe form a connection if someone is experiencing something else, or just save it for another day? And I will say to each person who's grieving, grant yourself the grace to make that decision. You do not have to open up to everyone.
Yeah.
But if you feel like it in the moment, why not? And in that moment, I said, my husband recently passed, and we're just kind of working on some stuff for that right now. And then she opened up and shared about a recent loss that she had.
Wow.
And again, I come back to that being a gift. I really do. I don't know about silver linings or any of that type of stuff, but those are the moments where I find like there might be some purpose to it. But Mandy becoming this grief coach and talking about grief all the time.
That's hard, Kelly. I was thinking about that part.
Yes. Emotionally draining, one would think, though she finds it's her purpose and she chose this. She says it is not always easy of taking this really difficult thing and making that the center of your professional life, kind of reliving that pain each day. She talked about how it's difficult. And then I asked her, how do you cope with that? How do you bounce back?
My therapist taught me this very powerful thing that I do after teaching, after sessions, where I will take 5 minutes and I go into the bathroom and I wash my hands, and it's a visualization. And as I wash my hands and the water goes down, I imagine that everybody's stories I'm washing away. I'm sending them love. I'm cleaning my hands to go now to be with my family. And they are now free to hold what my family needs them for. And that is a boundary practice and has helped tremendously. But I can also tell you that from a spiritual perspective, it doesn't feel heavy. It feels like I'm living my purpose. When I get to receive somebody's story or a detail about a loss or a death or a difficult emotion, it's an honor to me. And I don't know how to explain that except to say that I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That imagery of her washing her hands,
Washing the hands and sending it away, but also sending it with love.
Yeah.
Knowing that she's going to go do something else and serve in a different capacity. This made me think of, here at KOMO, we've faced all different sorts of tragedies and challenges. And before I shared the little thing that I shared on Instagram and on air here about losing Michael, someone who's a former colleague was like, are you sure you want to do that? Because it kind of opens the doors for people to pour their stories and their own loss kind of on top of you. And I don't want that to pull you down too.
Yeah.
He made a reference. I never worked with Kathy personally, but he said, once she shared her story, Kathy Gertson, who had brain cancer, that she started hearing from a lot of people, and that at times it was probably tough while you're going through your own thing to try and be there for other people as well. And kind of in this public platform that you and I both have, and I know you've been open about your journey with cancer too, did you find that trying to navigate that of being helpful and letting people know that they're not alone, but also receiving that and also kind of having that blindfold taken off about how much pain exists out there?
For me, when I heard other people share their stories about breast cancer and other types of cancer, I was floored by that feeling of being surrounded in a good way, of not feeling lonely, of not feeling alone in my story. So I found that to be comforting. I never felt like I was drowning in other people's sad stories.
Yeah.
How did you feel? Because I know you heard a lot of feedback.
I felt similarly.
Yeah.
When the former colleague said that, I was like, uh-oh. Am I making a mistake? Am I going to open Pandora's box and I will forever be the girl who lost her husband? Like, is that what I become? Yeah. Is that my identity? Do I then grieve the old identity of
not being that?
Not being the widow in the group. But no, similarly to you, I was pleasantly surprised to find that other people's stories gave me comfort and made me feel less alone. I heard from a lot of people who had very similar stories. Other women in their 30s who lost their husband in the last year with 3 young kids. And, I was able to connect with a couple of those people. And I think that I'll follow through with that because what a way, again, it comes back to the connection. And if you can share something like that with a stranger, there's something special to it. But again, it brings me back to feeling like grief otherwise is kind of this dirty word, as Mandy said, and there's not a lot of space where people like to talk about it. And I think that's because it goes back to our fears of death, another topic people don't like talking about. Has your relationship with death changed or how you think about it once you experience it kind of in your inner circle?
That word that you brought up, gift, the gift aspect of it, I have felt that personally. And what I mean by that is we talk about it a lot more in my family now. And as a good thing, as a positive thing, and how lucky are we to have gone through it together? My mother and I, my sister and I, my brother and I. It's brought us closer around a topic that was taboo.
I kind of felt the same way. I feel like when I was with Michael in the end, we had a couple hours to just kind of be together and talk about things and seeing how I will say I felt lucky because we had it under the best circumstances that were available to us. He was in a medical facility. I was able to be with him. He was able to talk up until the end. We were able to cover some of the ground that we wanted to talk about what he wanted the future to look like, all of those things. And I know not everybody gets that. So I'm very grateful for that. So when we were able to have those final couple of hours and I saw that it can be a beautiful thing, I was less afraid. It made me less afraid of dying someday. And I think what that does again is it makes me more open to talking about it, which circles back to vulnerability, which is really what Mandy keys on here in so many different ways. And really what she's talking about is having this cultural mind shift around talking about difficult things.
Many people still believe in the myth that vulnerability is weakness. Because if you are grieving, you are saying, I can't get over it, or I'm struggling to get over it. And there is a sense that you're not strong enough to deal with it. So I think that the reason we do this is that grief is vulnerable and we are still incredibly uncomfortable with vulnerability. I try to change this because right along with sharing my story about grief, I have all of my students do a lesson on what does courage look like in the classroom. And I ask them, when is the last time they did something brave? And when is the last time that they watched somebody else do something brave? And I truly believe that when we open the door and create a safe space for people to slowly try on vulnerability, trust is built, and then permission slips are given, and it becomes contagious in a way.
I just love that concept of it becoming contagious.
I wish we could address that from a young age. I wish that was part of the curriculum when I was in elementary school.
Well, it's part of her goal. Part of her goal is getting into classrooms and making this something that people talk about. One major thing through this whole grief experience that I've had recently is, what should people say? What should people do? What should they not do? These are a lot of questions that I've received. So I thought, instead of just speaking from my own experience, I would ask Mandy of saying, what can you say to someone who is going through grief? And one of the things that she touches on here is, you're not going to take someone else's pain away. So don't feel like you need to fix it, because that's not
Human nature, right?
Yes.
I'm going to fix you, Kelly.
Right. Please do.
In a loving way.
Can you fix me?
In a gentle, loving, supportive way.
Again, whenever you have that handbook, I will gladly accept it. But she says, any griever will tell you it's not possible. You're not going to be able to take away their pain. What they need in that moment is validation.
So first, there's perspective taking. And I think we tend to look at somebody in grief and we want to take their pain away. And any griever will tell you, number one, that's not possible. And number two, that's actually not what I need, because if you try to take it away from me, you're not validating me. So it's not trying to walk in their shoes. It's just trying to understand the world that they're coming from. The second step is staying out of judgment. So it's not saying what I would do is, or I think you should, or why did you? It's recognizing that active listening is your most important skill here. When we're trying to be supportive, a lot of people worry about saying the wrong thing, or they say, I don't have the words. You don't, nobody does, but your presence matters. So saying, I don't know what to say to you, but I love you and I'm here, is probably one of the most powerful things we can hear. Avoid at all cost any statement that starts with at least, because again, that is an attempt to diminish what a grieving person might be experiencing. And I do like to give the benefit of the doubt that that comes from a good place, but it's not helpful.
I'm so glad Mandy is talking about this, because we, all of us, you and I and everyone else listening, we're going to be on both sides of this coin, okay? Someday we will be grieving, and other days we will be that other person that doesn't know what to do or say.
Right.
And she's kind of talking about that grief etiquette, and I've always wanted to learn, where's that handbook, you know? And what a brilliant thing to just lay out. The whole, at least, cross that off.
Cross that off.
Active listening.
I would also say, don't say, you're young, there will be more people in the future. I would also avoid that statement.
Wow.
That's just my personal experience. Things that I have found helpful are seeking out community. So finding groups of people who have a similar experience. For me, it has been finding those outlets. You talked about letting out steam earlier. That is exactly how I feel. In the moment when I need to just release some steam about a frustration, that is something that I do. There's also been this really lovely concept of and rather than or. You can embrace those moments that you do feel good. So let's say that you are laughing with a group of friends, and this is after you've experienced grief. A lot of people will tell you, I feel guilty the second I start to feel that joy, because my person isn't here to see that. And something beautiful that I am working on thinking on, and this comes from my other group, is that you can feel joy in that moment and wish that your person was there to experience it. You can feel both of those things at the same time.
It doesn't have to cancel the other thing out.
You don't have to pick one.
Yeah.
And there can be a ton of ands all in one sentence, all in one experience. And it's something I'm working on because this is not an overnight fix your mind type of situation. This is a forever thing. The loss will be there. And it's just about how I adjust the space around that hole that will always be there. You know, talking about Michael, talking to Michael has been something that has been very helpful for me as well. And this is the last thing that Mandy will leave us with. And it is her advice to other people and what she has found helpful for herself after losing her mom.
Be still and go inward, truly. When I was making the decision about leaving and coming home to take care of my mom, I asked a lot of people what I should do. And a lot of people told me that wasn't the decision to make. And when I shut out the external noise and I sat with myself and asked myself what I needed to do, what felt most important to me, the decision was right there. I had it and I knew it. So I think to go inward and to trust yourself and knowing that your answers are there. You know, walking my mom home is my greatest honor in life. And to think that I could have missed that because I listened to somebody else's opinion about making that decision is terrifying to me. So I think this idea of trusting your gut and listening to your heart is most important.
So where does she want to put her energy in? And keeping that conversation, because the person is gone, the conversation doesn't have to end. The relationship doesn't have to end. When I've had difficult moments with the kids, I've said, Michael, can you get these kids under control? Give me strength, Michael.
Yeah.
And so I talk to him. And for me, that's helpful. And I hope that someone out there, if you're experiencing your own grief, no matter what it is, loss of identity or a person or a pet or whatever it is, I hope you find whatever it is that is helpful for you. And know that if it's helpful for you, then that's just fine. And run with it.
Why would we stop talking to them? That's my question. You know, I talk to my dad all the time. And here's the thing, and here's what I just want to throw out there, and you brought this up. You know, we think about them even when they're alive, but they're not with us. A movie trailer comes out. Oh, Henry would love that movie. He's not sitting right next to me. He didn't tell me that, but I know. Why does that essence, why does that go away when they're not here? Because you know them, you love them, that conversation doesn't end. And it's funny what she talked about, Mandy, when her mom pops in and says things to her. You know, randomly I'll be driving down the street and I don't know, this is a weird example, but some decision I made. And all of a sudden, I'll just blurt out, I know you don't agree with me, Dad, but it is what it is. I can't explain it, Kelly, but in that moment, it's that surge in my heart and my brain, and it brings that connection back.
And that's beautiful.
Why would that ever go away?
Well, Mary, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kelly.
And Mandy.
Mandy is brilliant.
Mandy, thank you. And anyone out there, you're not alone in this thing called grief. And we want to thank you guys so much for listening to this and letting me share part of my story with you. And I hope that something resonates and something helps along the way.
Thank goodness we have this community.
Yeah, that's right. Hard Turn is a Sinclair podcast produced out of KOMO TV in Seattle, Washington. We're your hosts, Kelly Koopmans
And Mary Naum. Our show is produced and edited by Jordan Rizzieri and Brian Petrus, with engineering support from Adam Bronstein, Bill Thesh, and John Reynolds. Production support from Eric Newell.
For more information on the topics discussed in this episode and to stay up to date on future episodes, follow us on Instagram at Hard Turn Podcast and on X at Hard Turn Pod.
You can follow Hard Turn on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you know someone making a big change in their life? Share this week's episode. Your recommendation helps our show grow. So spread the word. Where was I going?
Been there, done that.
This is a moment.
Hard Turn was presented by Overlake Medical Center and Clinics.